Welcome to the Devil's Advocate podcast. I'm Shervin House.
And I'm Payman Batani.
And this is a podcast where we discuss controversial topics in society, politics, etc. Please note that none of the opinions, views, or arguments presented in this podcast are necessarily our own views or beliefs. As the name of the podcast suggests, oftentimes we will be making arguments for sides that we ourselves don't necessarily align with. In fact, the aim of the podcast is to offer nuanced and fair arguments for both sides of each issue, regardless of our own opinions on the matter.
So here's how this works. This wonderful $2 coin, Canadian coin I should add, decides who argues which side of the argument. We have to be both prepared to defend both sides, even though we might not necessarily agree with one side or the other. We're going to flip this coin and we're off to the races.
Fantastic.
Today's topic is
Universal Basic Income.
Yay! Super
also known as a UBI.
Yes.
So basically, just to give some context, in case you're not aware what this is, it's basically a proposal to give every citizen of a country, or is it every resident? We can say either or. Either or. Every resident or every citizen of the country to pay them on a regular basis, so that everyone has some sort of an income regardless of whether they have a job, what kind of a job they have. So for example, famous politician Andrew Yang was proposing this in the 2020 presidential campaign in the United States. His proposal was to pay every American $1,000 a month through this UBI program, and this is every American. So that's just one example. Obviously, there could be a lot of different ways where this can be implemented. But yeah, that's what we're talking about today. Do you have anything to add before we get into it?
The key point is that this is not something that would be conditioned. The key point is that every citizen would receive it. Sure. You can provide some sort of like income-based condition, but broadly speaking, it differs from other sort of social services where it's like specific to food stamps or a particular type. This is like purely universal.
Exactly.
All right, moment of truth.
All right, so let's walk through how this exactly works. So we're gonna, how about you? You call it actually, because I'm pretty good at flipping coins. You call it. We have heads or tails. So the bear is the tails, I guess.
Yes.
If you get it correctly, so if you say heads and heads come, so I'm just gonna flip it, put it here. If it's heads and you said heads, you have to argue for it. If the other way around, I have to argue for it.
Sure.
Make sense?
Yes.
All right. Ready? So call it when it's in the air.
Okay. All right.
No, you didn't call it. When it's in the air, you have to call it. All right. So,
well, given the size of me, I'm gonna
don't call it yet. So I don't influence it. That's how it works. Ready?
Bear.
Interesting. All right. Bear. So you have to argue for it.
I'm arguing for it.
There we go. Interesting.
Surprise.
Surprise.
So sad.
But obviously, don't give away what our own thoughts on the matter is, because that's not the point.
Absolutely neutral.
That's not the point. The point is to offer fair arguments on both sides. But yeah, so how about this? Since you're four, you go first. Give us some of your main points, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. So the purpose is fairly simple.
Yeah.
It ranges from a range of economic and utilitarian arguments all the way to philosophical and what it means to be a citizen of a country.
Yeah.
First and foremost, what UBI would do is right off the bat is tackle poverty head on. There are many cases, whether it's the Alaska Permanent Fund dividend, or whether it's the I think the 1970s experiment in Manitoba with respect to paying a fixed income to a set of population. This almost often, especially for the low-income families, has a direct impact in terms of lifting them out of poverty, because it covers essential services, food, education, so on and so forth. And it also enables them to invest a lot more into education or healthcare or things that like pay dividend in terms of lifting them from their current socioeconomic standpoint. It's obviously, from an economic standpoint, it can act as a great stimulus, especially in smaller towns where you basically produce consumer markets because people now have potentially disposable income to spend on things. It's arguably, it arguably functions much better than the welfare state, which, you actually give people the option to spend their money however they want. So you reap the benefits of the free consumer market, however it is. I'll add some caveat that you probably want to, still keep the Canadian healthcare system going. Healthcare might be the one area that differentiates, but for the rest, where it's food, where it's other services, you could probably rely on the free market doing its job quite well. It's a much more simplified welfare system. Arguably, it could replace a lot of the stuff where a lot of the current government budget goes into administration, figuring out who's eligible, so on and so forth. And also, given the fact that every citizen receives it, it doesn't really produce those types of incentives where it's like, like for instance, if you're on unemployment but you like get a part-time job, then you have to like come off of unemployment, so you might have like some adverse incentive. It doesn't do any of that. Everybody qualifies. I'll just throw in as the last argument before passing it on to you. As you know, my background is in AI, and we're likely going to see a lot of automation happening.
Yeah.
Now, I don't broadly disagree with the argument that, like, we're going to destroy some jobs and create new ones.
Yeah.
But the pace of innovation is huge, and you probably cannot, retrain some copywriter to be, like, suddenly a very skilled programmer right off the bat. So this type of income kind of covers that transition period.
Okay.
Up to you.
First of all, paying money to everyone is not necessarily a great counter-poverty strategy or anti-poverty strategy. For example, we've seen giving stuff like food stamps or medical aid is usually a better way to do it. In fact, a lot of times when you give money to people, they don't tend to always make the best decisions possible, at least not everyone. So that's the first issue that I could bring up about implementing a universal basic income, because again, it's very important to mention that it's a basic income, right? So it has to be in the form of cash, at least the way we're talking about it right now, and that could be problematic. Number two is that the money has to come from somewhere, right? The money doesn't grow on trees. Now I'm sure we'll get into what plans you're proposing, where the money can come from, but that's an issue that needs to be figured out. Number three is that potentially giving everyone money for free removes the incentive for people to work, because if you're getting money, and of course this is not going to apply to everyone, but I feel like there are a lot of people out there, or actually I can definitely tell you there are a lot of people out there who, if they get a little bit of money from the government, they're going to be happy with that. They're not going to do anything. They're just going to sit around all day, play video games, do whatever, right? So that's an issue. We don't want to remove the incentive for people to work, because a lot of times work isn't just even about making ends meet. It also provides a sense of purpose to a lot of people. It also gives them some sort of a medium where they can develop their skills or do interesting things with their career. So that's if we remove that incentive, that could cause other issues, particularly when it comes to healthcare, or I should say mental health. There we go. Number four is, as you mentioned, automation. This is something that we're going to get into probably a lot, because this is one of the main reasons why universal basic income is so prevalent nowadays, whereas beforehand maybe it wasn't thought about as much. And a very key point is to take into account that just because automation is going to replace some jobs, it doesn't mean that new jobs won't be created as a result of it. And in fact, if you look at history, you can see numerous examples of this occurring, particularly when there is a huge shift in the industrial landscape, right? So we'll get into that. I have some examples that we can talk about, and of course, those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it, right? So if you're not aware of how people were perceiving other industrial changes in the past, we might be making the same mistake as them. Number five is that paying everyone money, you're putting some inflationary pressure out there in the market, because if you give everyone money, they have more money to spend. And if everyone has more money to spend, then the cost of goods and services will likely go up fairly soon. And as a result, you're kind of doing something that's kind of counterintuitive, because you're paying people money, but then all the money that they had from before is worthless. So that could potentially be an issue. Number six is that some employers may use this as an opportunity to pay less wages. So, for example, there are some jobs where tips are very prevalent. Employers refuse to pay more than minimum wage because they argue that, hey, my waiter can just make a lot of money from tips, right? I don't have to pay anything more than minimum wage. And something like that could be, obviously not to that drastic level, but you could see employers paying less wages as a result of this, which could, again, make the whole thing kind of counterintuitive. Because if you receive the benefit, but let's say you make a little bit less from your job, then you might just break even, right? So what was even the point of this? And last but not least is insufficient targeting that we need to talk about. And that's the fact that if you're paying it to everyone, which is the whole idea of universal basic income, you're also going to be paying it to billionaires. You're going to be paying it to people who are millionaires, or even people who are well off. Maybe they're not millionaires, but they're doing well. They have a good job. They don't really need the extra money, but you're paying everyone, right? And a lot of those people just don't need it. So maybe that money could be better spent elsewhere, maybe in infrastructure, maybe in other areas, maybe for other benefits, or maybe just it could be used to help people who really need it, right? So the idea of paying everyone the same, it may not be the best way to go about it. But yeah, those are my points. But yeah, which one do you want to
Awesome.
get into?
Let's first tackle the ones that like we both discussed.
Sure.
Like for instance, addressing poverty.
Okay.
And yeah, go both sides of it. So my thought process about universal basic income and poverty,
Mhm.
given also a number of cases, I think I mentioned the ALSCO fund, the Manitoba one. There's also a number of these studies in I think Africa. Yes,
Okay.
basic income. Finland has implemented one.
Sure.
A pilot project. There's
Canada had a trial run as well.
Ontario.
Yeah, in the 70s.
That was the Manitoba one.
Oh, that's Manitoba, yeah.
There's also a study by Give Directly, an organization in Kenya that
Yeah.
has also reported these things. So there's a lot of ongoing studies. There
Sure.
was, I suspect there was one in LA by Andrew Yang. Unfortunately, it had some strings attached in terms of what
I see.
sort of population received it, which, you know,
Yeah, that could be problematic.
good, like bad or good in the polarized political environment of the U.S. that basically, you know, like
Yeah,
kneecapped
everyone's
the
going to point
study.
out. Yeah, 100%.
But nevertheless, the key point is there are several advantages that UBA provides.
Okay.
And perhaps there could be a lot of more nuance, and there might be programs that tackle poverty more effectively.
Okay.
But the first advantage is that it's just hard cash.
Yeah.
And that in many ways, one, enables the individual in poverty to have more agency over what to do with the money.
Sure.
But it also means that the provider of the service would be playing within the free market. And I think you and I both agree that within most contexts, free market is much more efficient than the government.
Okay.
The other one is, and this is arguably like the biggest issue with all these programs, whether it's food stamps or like housing for the homeless, all of those ones, is that for one, you have to prove that you qualify.
Yeah.
That proving part is partly degrading to the individual to have to like admit that they're in this situation, but also it somewhat provides this incentive that you might want to stay in that environment in order to receive the benefit. Whereas this is like without strings attached, and so this benefit, you would not lose it if you move outside of poverty.
So if I can just chime in on that. So it is true that some people might. So the way the welfare system is set up right now, some people would say, why would I go and work full time and make like $500 more a month than just stay where I am, right? That is true. But the same applies with universal basic income, right? You could have a lot of people who are getting it with no string attached, and they say, why would I work? I'm getting money, right? So that particular point, I don't know if it really applies, because it's kind of the same in both situations. Like putting universal basic income, maybe I understand the dignity part, but the part regarding people who are not incentivized to go and work because of welfare, that's not going to be addressed by putting in universal basic income instead, because you're still getting money from the government, right?
Yes and no. There's like probably the most recent example of that type of adverse incentive was in the COVID stimulus package.
Sure.
Like, especially in Canada, I remember like there was a requirement which basically meant that in order to receive $2,000 a month, you had to have a part-time income less than $1,000.
$5,000 in the past year it was, I think.
And I think it was also like contingent on something that like how much your income is at that moment.
It wasn't. It was just.
I think so, because I didn't qualify because of my
really?
researcher stipend and the other income I had.
Oh, interesting.
So, but like most of our friends were students at the time, so they were cool.
Yeah.
Like I remember talking to a mutual friend of ours.
Sure.
And she was describing how like basically she lowered her hours.
I see.
Because then she would qualify and enact it.
Oh yeah, it is. So what it was, I remember now. It was that you have to have your hours reduced because of COVID.
Yeah,
that's what it was. So if you're losing out on any money, then they will give you the money, basically.
Yeah, but if I remember correctly, the weird part was like the cap for like loss was like 1,000, whereas the package itself was 2,000.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
you had,
something like
this
that.
arbitrage amount in
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
and so for instance, that's like an example of an adverse incentive being created, because like even optimizing for finances, unless you can like walk off to Google and like make 6 figures right away.
Yeah.
There's an adverse incentive, especially if you're like working minimum wage jobs, to not participate in the economy and still be better. This is like, again, like no strings attached.
I understand what you're saying, but surely the solution to that is just to fix those issues, right? So if there's an issue with incentive, with the way welfare is set up, surely the solution is to go and fix that, right? So for example, if there was a discrepancy of $1,000, surely the solution would be to make it $2,000, so the discrepancy isn't there. But
that is true.
Putting in UBI, does that really solve it?
Well, it solves it in the sense that you, in adding all that additional complexity and all these additional rules, you're doing 2 things. One is you're potentially making it more difficult for people to access the money.
Okay.
But you're also making it more expensive for you to provide this, because you need all this system of bureaucracy and administration to actually manage it. Whereas UBI is fairly simple. It's like, for the sake of argument, we can say only citizens receive it, or only like permanent residents receive it. It's like you have like a SIN number, you have like proof of residency. That's it.
There's still some administrative steps needed. For example, what if someone is dead and you're collecting on behalf of them or something like that?
Exactly.
So there's still some, but yeah, it's less. I agree.
No, there would be some challenges.
Yeah.
I suspect there would be a better program addressing poverty. There's still an argument to go for UBI for all the other benefits I mentioned.
Sure.
Is there anything you want to respond with respect to poverty before we move on to the, I guess, next item you mentioned, which was how do we fund?
So let me get this straight. Are you arguing that UBI helps lift people out of poverty? Is that the main gist of what you're saying?
It doesn't lift it.
Okay.
In the same sense that like you still need a number of other factors for like offering social mobility. It increases the rate at which that can happen, and it makes it easier for people to meet their basic needs, and by extension be able to do a number of other stuff that would otherwise lift them. Like because like any range of UBI we're talking about, it doesn't even equate like full-time minimum wage work.
Okay.
All the numbers.
I mean, you could set the rules, right? You're for it. You could say this is the best way to do it. So let's do it this way.
It's true, but most of the discussions so far that have happened from anybody proposing,
it's very low.
It's within the $7,000 to $20,000 range.
Exactly,
like
and $20,000
is also the extreme point.
I think $1,000 a month is the most realistic one.
Yeah, something like that, which is like it can go a long way in addressing those like essential needs, but you're not balling on $1,000 a month.
Yeah, and also the other thing I wanted to mention, and get ready for this, folks. This is the cancelable thing coming in. But a lot of times, poverty isn't just about not having money, right? Because it's not about how much money you earn; it's about how much money you keep, right? So if you're making $10,000 a month and you spend it all on drugs, right? You have no money still. You're still in poverty, right? So it's not just about giving people cash. A lot of the poverty issues will not be addressed by that, is what I'm saying. Maybe some of it, but not a big portion of people in poverty will still be in poverty.
I don't think it would eradicate poverty. I think that's a correct assessment. I, however, think, and I don't have like any stats written here.
So are you saying it helps with poverty?
But I think it certainly improves in the sense of providing access to those basic services. I mean, like
which ones?
Well, for instance, imagine if instead of like food stamps specifically, you had some like UBI effectively covering those. You have, again, an essential requirement, which is like food on the table. And you're providing that to the individual, the option to be able to buy it. That's, for instance, addressing.
But you're assuming people always make the best decision possible.
Some people will certainly try and abuse it, or like,
not even abuse. Like let's say if you're a drug addict, right? Yeah. You get $1,000. How likely are you to go and spend the whole $1,000 on drugs the first day?
Probably.
You know what I mean?
Likely, yeah.
Yeah, and then what happens for the rest of the 30 days?
The issue is that is correct, but those are like in the what I would describe as the edge cases. It's like the society as a whole is what's in concern here. But it is
honestly, I would argue people who are good with money are the edge case. Most people are not good with money. Not maybe
Well,
not to
it
the
depends
degree
what
of.
you mean, like what?
Yeah.
Yes. There's probably like a very small sample of people who can take this 1,000.
Come closer, please.
Am I?
Yeah,
Oh,
little
okay.
closer. Yeah.
There's
There you
probably like a very small subset of the population that can like take this $1,000 a month and do some wizard investing with it and turning it into like millions of dollars after 2 years. But
That's not what I mean by growth
to me,
mindset.
if somebody like if this $1,000 is used by a family who's fundamentally poor, but is now able to actually feed their children, so you don't have any issues from malnutrition rising, or if this is like something that allows somebody who's lost their job to have a bit of a buffer room so they can retrain for a new job, I think those are still like positive social outcomes, even though these people might not be exactly like the
Those would be, but the issue is, how do you know that's how they're going to spend it? Whereas if you give them food stamp, they can only get food with it. Do you know? Do you see the difference?
This is not targeted. I agree with you that like it limits that targeting. There's obviously a good argument that like you want to incentivize a particular behavior, if especially you're tackling poverty.
Sure.
The difficulty is. Well, for one, I remember reading that like the majority of the U.S. stimulus within households that are considered below the poverty line was like spent on food and clothing and shelter as a third item. So there is some preliminary evidence that like
this was a study. Or what was it?
The only issue why I don't have it written is that I remember it was somebody specifically on the Bill Maher debate show mentioned it.
Sure.
Could be like a completely skewed
That's fine. We'll accept it.
But nevertheless, there's that component of well, in some capacity, it's kind of like welfare.
Okay.
But with the respect for individualism.
Okay.
You could argue that like any of us being like in whatever income range, we might make poor choices with that income range.
Sure. It's not just for poor people. A lot of people.
You always have to like give some level of agency to the individual, and have that risk of them spending it on something that's probably not optimal for them.
But aren't we trying to do what's best for everyone? Like
you can only maximize it in aggregate over the entire society. You can't really maximize it at the individual level.
But then how would you say that universal basic income is better across society than the way welfare is set up right now?
Well, it goes now back to one, it comes with no strings attached, so it doesn't have those same set of requirements for you to stay where you are.
But why is that necessarily better though?
For instance, we mentioned the example of the COVID stimulus and how a good number of the
we talked about this. That's not necessarily a case where you want to replace it with universal basic income. That's a case where you want to address those discrepancies and maybe change the numbers around or something, right? So that the incentive isn't created to abuse the system. Do you know what I'm saying?
My counter to that is universal basic income. We could come up with some more complex solution that's more optimal. But universal basic income, like its simplicity is a feature that actually enables you to, one, like effectively implement it.
Okay.
And two, it doesn't require a lot of details to be able to administrate it. And so you for one, it's like probably a much higher percentage of the funds you actually allocate to UBI will actually end up in people's pockets. But conversely, for any kind of social program, I would happily look at the stats to see what proportion of that goes to administrative costs and other issues. It brings the benefits of basically engaging the free market on the consumer side for what you're trying to use, and like considering all of those. It's kind of like to me, UBI is in many ways like democracy. It's like it's not a perfect system, but it's in many ways superior to all the other ones we've got going.
Is it now?
Because it provides a number of things. Like you could argue that in a democratic system, maybe we could do some sort of like testing where like people who are more informed get a bigger say, and probably that would be more optimal. But as soon as we go into there, like the administrative costs and the risk of having to like deal with that is such a huge barrier that a simple solution is not necessary. Like a simple suboptimal solution could in many ways in practicality be more optimal than a complex optimal solution that's very difficult to implement.
Okay, so maybe we can get a little bit more we can go in that direction a little bit more. So let's talk about some of the other issues that come with just paying people money, other than the fact that they may not spend it on the right things. First of all, what are your proposals on where the money should come from?
It's not my proposal.
Oh, sure.
But
Any
there
proposal you
are
wanna
two
start.
ways to
Sure.
go about this. One is about basically repurposing the current welfare state.
Okay.
And so, like, changing government's revenue to focus specifically on UBI. Depending on the amount of money you're looking at, you're talking about like 3 to 10% of GDP is spent, depending on what level of money you want to like inject as UBI into people. By comparison, most Western governments operate at 15 to 20% of GDP in revenue. Albeit there are some deficits, so their spending is higher. But
Sure.
for instance, I think in the United States, if you merge Medicare, Medicaid, and some defense spending. Am I out again?
You're good. You're good.
Okay.
I just want to make sure. Yeah, you're close enough.
Yeah. Like merge those, I think, like to the tune of like $2.1 trillion, which those three programs, I don't, you could like even leave defense spending untouched, but those two key programs together pretty much get there. You could, if I remember the numbers correctly, basically provide something in between $7,000 to $10,000 a year to every American.
So
$7,000.
So is that just the money repurposed from welfare, or is that additional money?
That would be the option to repurpose from welfare.
But repurposing doesn't cover all, like in nearly close to all of it. Even Andrew Yang's proposal, only about a quarter of it, I think, was the welfare repurposement or something along those lines. I don't remember the exact number, but
well, keep in mind, like for instance, in the United States, we're doing well, like 300 million people, $7,000 a year. That's about 2.1 trillion. Let's say you have $100 billion of administrative costs, which I would argue is like way overestimating. It's about 2 trillion. The U.S. government's revenue, I think, is like just shy of $3 trillion.
Sure, but that money is going other places too, right?
The biggest spending item outside of welfare is defense.
So that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Are you proposing that we cut on defense? Are you proposing that we cut on this?
No. So my proposal is basically like if you don't want to touch the tax system, that's option one. Then you have to basically radically repurpose every welfare program you have to support UBI. You could potentially like take a chunk of UBI and invest in healthcare, so still maintain the healthcare system. But
you need a lot more money than welfare, because welfare is only a fraction of the population, whereas this is going to be for everyone.
It would certainly be expensive, which then brings up the idea of like potentially increasing taxes. Now, that's a doable idea in the sense that, for one, there are a number of things at play. For one, you will. Okay, I need to structure this properly, so we can like go through each point.
Sure.
But basically, we're likely going to have to deal with higher taxes at some point.
Okay.
Because of the fact that the government has been running deficits. That you could argue that like limits the budget for UBI.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, like taxes. Every politician moves taxes at some point, and we can talk about the practicality of moving taxes. I would probably agree with you that a more radical change in tax policy would not be accomplished in a practical sense. But if you had the option to do it, it's certainly doable. And
so what would that look like?
Many Western societies, like for instance, the United States, had very high marginal tax rates for like high levels of income. I think under Eisenhower, that was the highest, which was at like 91%.
Give me a number. What are you proposing? 2% increase, 3% increase?
It depends on what the budget is, but I would not be surprised if you can amend the budget while slashing some of the other welfare services and merge them all under UBI.
Yeah.
They could probably get a balanced budget with like a single-digit increase in taxes, primarily on the wealthier.
So do you want to tax higher at the highest bracket, or do you want to just tax higher at all brackets?
It would be progressive, so it would be like the lowest bracket would probably pay nothing, and then the highest. No,
so the way it is set up right now, right? Yeah. So there are numbers. Yeah, it is the way.
Yeah, so I'm saying like the lowest bracket would probably see no increase, whereas the highest bracket would see most increase.
Then the middle bracket will see a little bit of increase.
Yeah,
what you're saying?
Convex.
So again, I would challenge you with this. Someone who's making, let's say, $70,000 a year, right? They have to pay a little bit more in taxes. Their money is getting inflated a little bit, right? Because there's the inflationary pressure by paying everyone money, and they get $1,000 back. That person probably breaks even, if not loses a little bit of money. So why are we paying that person $1,000 instead of just keeping things the way they are? And where we are supporting a lot of people who need welfare, right? Why do we have to pay everyone money where a lot of people who get it don't see any benefit? And the other people, I mean, they were on welfare anyways, right? So what is the point of this?
Keep in mind, if you're like paying somebody $10,000 and then they pay $10,000 in taxes, you have in effect paid them nothing. The nature of the transaction itself doesn't really matter that much.
No, but what I'm saying is, the way the system is right now, right? You're arguing that replacing welfare the way it is right now with UBI would be better, right? Correct?
Yes, it would be more simplified and would have a range of advantages. That
There will be some advantages, right?
Don't
That's what I'm struggling to see. What are the advantages exactly? Because people who are on welfare, they were getting money anyways, right? So yeah, they're getting money now, but they were getting money anyways. People who are not on welfare right now.
They weren't really getting money. They were getting different services.
We talked about that, why those services might actually be better than money. But let's say those people are pretty much the same, but maybe they're getting cash instead of that, right? So maybe that's one benefit you're talking about. But what is the benefit for everyone else? Like someone who's making decent money, a little bit higher than average, nothing crazy.
Yeah.
What does that person see exactly?
It provides several advantages. One, it's a social safety net. For whatever reason, if that income trail is disrupted, they have a guaranteed thing.
We have that already as well. It's called employment insurance.
Sure.
Yeah.
It provides employment insurance for
6 months.
Other family members. For instance, if like the mother in the family is not working, there's still some form of compensation for her otherwise volunteer work.
Sure.
So there are still those that employment insurance wouldn't necessarily address.
Yeah.
The other thing is just by having it for everybody, you simplify the program, which allows for efficiencies, similar to how universal healthcare system provides against what the United States have. You could argue that like somebody who's in a 7-figure income range could not only easily afford private insurance, but could easily afford all the operations out of pocket, and probably I think it was Scott Galloway who said that like he doesn't pay for insurance because if you consider his healthcare spending over time, given the fact that he's rich enough that he can muscle an operation, he's actually saving money. There are those advantages too, which is by providing for everyone, the system works much more efficiently, and plus it's not. But again,
sorry to interrupt you.
Given that everybody's getting it, so there's that social element, the cultural element.
But again, in that specific case you were saying, right? What we don't do is give people money and say, okay, keep this in case you get sick, and then use it to pay for your doctor, right? What we do is we say, you have, at least here in Canada, we say you're covered. Don't worry, if you have cancer tomorrow out of nowhere, you're not gonna go bankrupt. It's gonna be covered. Right?
Yeah.
That's what we do. And that's why it works. But whereas if you just paid everyone money and said, you told them, okay, keep that money in case one day have cancer, do you really think everyone would keep that money?
Not necessarily, but the money is flowing into your account. So it's kind of like a guarantee that no matter what happens, you have a bare minimum purchasing power next month.
No, but what I'm trying to illustrate with that point is that it doesn't really work the same way as a universal healthcare, right? Because universal healthcare is a service that's available to everyone. Whereas universal basic income is the money that's given to you, but if you don't manage it properly, it could be turned into nothing in no time, right?
You could make the same argument about healthcare. If you don't use the services properly, you could either be a massive...
How does that work exactly?
You could either be a massive financial burden on the system by just overreacting to everything and not taking good care of yourself, or
we're talking about your risk of ruin, right? If you develop cancer tomorrow, you're covered. You don't have to worry about where do I get the money for the operation right now, right? Whereas if you're paying them money every day, again, I know it's a very extreme example, but it's easier to understand with extreme examples. If you pay them $1,000 at day one and then they spend it all on drugs, what are they doing for the next 30 days until they get more money? How are they going to pay for food? How are they going to find a place to live if they don't have a roof over themselves? So
that's a good point. I see the point you're
I'm just trying to say it's different than universal healthcare. You can't really compare.
Yes and no. There are similarities, but yes, there are differences too.
Yeah.
My main point is by again making it universal. You increase the efficiency of the way this is being distributed.
I understand that point.
Keep in mind that there are downstream effects of for instance, having universal healthcare doesn't just mean that if you get cancer, you have access to healthcare services. It also means that your neighbors, your community has the same access.
Sure.
Which has downstream effects on crime rates, on stability of the society, on all of those. UBI provides a similar setup, where even though you specifically might not need this money, the availability of it as to every individual provides a sort of basic minimums, which then has those positive downstream effects.
Can I just, before we move on, I just wanted to counter to your point about efficiency, because I agree it's more efficient. But what I wanted to bring up is that I think efficiency is one of the least important things.
What would be more important?
A lot of other factors. For example, how effective is it? Is it actually helping people in need? I think those are much more important than efficiency. For example, what is the most efficient system you can think of? Think of the most efficient system.
It's probably like some free market system.
I'll tell you the most
barrier to
no.
demand and supply.
The most efficient system is to do nothing. Very efficient. You don't have to spend any money on doing anything, right?
Efficiency is a measure of productivity.
No, but the productivity is very good, right? You're achieving exactly what your goal is. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Your goal is doing nothing, yes. But
well, you could say that, we're motivating people to go out there and get their stuff done, right? We're incentivizing them. But what I'm trying to say is that efficiency isn't the most important thing. Like, if you have a better system that helps a lot more people, but it costs, let's say, a little bit more to administrate it, that's absolutely worth it, I would say. Would you not agree? If it achieves better results.
Because a measure of efficiency is like productivity relative to the cost.
But that's not what you're referring to. You were saying it's easier to get it done, right? So you were saying it's more efficient, as in it's simple, it's easy to administrate. You don't have to worry about.
And in aggregate, that results in it becoming more effective than having a
exactly. Don't go too far away from the mic.
It ends up being more effective in terms of addressing those underlying issues.
Okay.
Like, for instance, putting aside the culture of stigma that comes with something that's like government welfare and not necessarily something that is like a government, I guess, constitutional right or something that like every citizen receives. Putting that aside, compare the experience between somebody who's, for whatever reason, in need of money to like feed the children in the family who are like in the growth stage. So this type of nutrition really matters.
Sure.
The difference between them having to manage food stamps and having to reapply and having to like prove that they qualify, which means that they're not wealthy enough. Like, the difference between that system and something that they just get a direct cash infusion every month is that one just like ultimately ends up working much better, because of the fact that the access to the cash is much easier. I mean, like, say what you want to say about the COVID stimulus, the stuff about inflation, the stuff about budgetary requirements. The one thing it did directly put cash in people's pockets. It weathered out the economic and many of those other factors that would have hit the population if we went into lockdown without economic stimulus.
It did, but it came at a cost, though, right?
Yeah. So
because it wasn't a great system. For example, the inflationary pressure we were talking about. Now we're seeing the implications of it.
So I think in terms of like effectiveness, insofar as these governmental programs go, in terms of achieving the downstream task of providing access to some essential goods and essential services, with some burden of responsibility on the individual who's receiving it, which I would argue that on a philosophical standpoint, especially in the West, we generally trust the individual at some levels. Like, it achieves the ultimate goal. Now, you can like in the same sense that the stimulus packages achieve the goal of giving people purchasing power during a lockdown, during basically the economy going on pause. However, there's obviously how do we pay for it, inflation. So I'm happy to like move on to those conversations. Sure. But I wanted to like maintain a point in terms of the fact that it will, insofar that the goal is to provide everybody with some essential level of like quality of life. It will achieve that, given some of the assumptions of agency we make about the individual citizen, which the same assumptions hold when they vote, the same assumptions hold when they broadly participate in other society.
Okay, so just before we move on to inflation, I wanted to just do one last response to that, is that it could do that, but it doesn't necessarily do that. And that's the main issue with it, right? Because first of all, you're not giving them life-changing amounts, right? It's just $1,000 a month. It's not going to change anything too drastically. And number two, a lot of people are just not going to use it properly, right? Unless you're proposing paying more amounts or whatever, which the more you pay, the more it's going to cause inflation, which we're going to talk about right now. I
think I'll just say this.
Sure, go for it.
Which is the Minimum experiment in Canada, the one about Winnipeg. The preliminary findings, and keep in mind that the experiment, I think, was paused as soon as the
Conservatives
it was
4 years, right?
took power. It was like primarily a liberal NDP program.
Of course it was.
Preliminary findings from the experiment showed a reduction in poverty rates, improved health outcomes, and an increase in high school completion rates. Which the third one was the most interesting one because it actually allowed, especially low-income families, a lot more flexibility in terms of having one parent home more involved in the children's lives than like both parents working. And so in all of these studies, like the end goal of like the impact on poverty, the impact on like those types of societal outcomes, it comes out. Now, let's move on to inflation.
Well, last thing before we move on.
I'll promise not to respond.
Because you brought on. I'll just say this. People act differently when they're being observed versus when they're not being observed and it's something that's there indefinitely, right? So if you conduct an experiment on welfare, I'm sure people wouldn't...
What's it called? Like the Hawthorne effect? Something like
that? Something along those lines, If you conduct an experiment on welfare before you implemented it, I'm sure you would have got much better results than what we're seeing today, where a lot of people abuse it, and a lot of people don't use the funds that they're getting properly. So there's that issue as well. But I think we can move on. Yeah, inflation. Go ahead.
Obviously, if you inject cash into a country, into an economy, without an equal and correlated increase in the supply of goods, you're going to deal with inflation.
Exactly.
There's two things. There are three broad things to consider here.
Sure.
The first one is, where the source of UBI comes from is important. Because if you're repurposing previous welfare programs, or if you're increasing taxes, you're nevertheless like moving money out of the economy through taxation or through repurposement of other programs that would have injected services or resources otherwise.
Sure.
And so in aggregate, you're not necessarily increasing the money supply unless you start like printing money or running a massive deficit to run this program. So if you're running a deficit and if the budget is not necessarily balanced, yes, it would be inflationary.
Yep.
But if it's not, for instance, imagine if in the case of the COVID stimulus packages, instead of putting it on the Fed's balance sheet, if they had issued governmental bonds, where you would have taken income and capital that was available in the private markets through government bonds, so you would have hit the private equity or like private capital side of the economy while injecting capital into the other sides. And so although you could see inflation trends in like basic goods, like essential goods, especially if the production of those don't go higher, you'd say disinflationary trends across the other sectors of the economy that rely on those higher incomes or those previous welfare programs that were in place.
But it does speed up the economy, though. When you pay everyone money and they have more purchasing power?
Again, it highly depends on how you're paying for it. If you're paying it through taxes, you're reducing the purchasing power of those who are paying those taxes. If it's through higher taxes, especially high income individuals.
That's actually not true. The reason for that is because, let's say you're Elon Musk, right? If you get taxed at 50% or 60%, does that change whether you're able to afford food or not?
No, but what it would have a disinflationary effect is in asset classes. Elon Musk is a bit of a unique case because he's never sold anything, but a lot of the other individuals in his like wealth bracket, greater taxes on them, assuming they pay it, which like time and time again you see like billionaire taxes like at 8%.
That's beside the point,
but a reduction in their purchasing power may not reflect itself in like food or other stuff, but it starts reflecting itself in asset classes.
So in property, CPI inflation, right?
So the core that could rise if you don't balance it up properly with increases in supply.
So you have to subsidize for supply too, basically.
Not necessarily, because if you're improving, especially local markets, by like creating a consumer market in otherwise areas that would not have a consumer market, would not have as big of a consumer market without UBI. Like for instance, if you implement UBI on Wall Street, it's not going to have an impact on the consumerism on Wall Street because it's like a 2% increase in their income. But if you do it in some small town in I don't know, Yukon, then that could have a very significant impact in terms of creating a consumer market. But there will be some inflation pressure. You will, however, eventually see production actually come up. And given the fact that this is a recurrent money, those consumer markets will, broadly speaking, remain. They're not like cyclical. And so you would expect supply to catch up in time.
Okay. So I know
that's the first point.
Yeah.
There are two others, but let's just
let me give you this. I want to concede this point to you because I think this is one thing, and I'm actually surprised you didn't say this. Since automation is going to replace
that was my third point.
Oh, okay, so that's perfect. So I will concede that if you tax companies that are implementing automation, that could be a good way to do it, because you're taking money from a place where value is being created without money being put in, at least as much as it was before, right? Because you don't have to have the labor costs when you're automating some of those processes. And then if you redistribute that money, then sure, I guess inflationary pressure wouldn't be as bad, right? Because the cost of the goods aren't going to necessarily go up. It's true that there is more demand for it, but the supply will also rise because there's automation, so you can produce more for less money.
Yes. The key point, I guess this actually brings me to the second and third point. The third point would have been automation, but it actually goes hand in hand to some extent with the second point, which I would argue is like aging population. Both are fundamentally about the fact that we often like think about inflation trends in the sense that how this will impact the supply side of goods. Yeah. But something that's often forgotten is that our economy functions by also having a demand on the other side, and increasingly a consumer-driven economy where the demand is to consume those goods and services. If we, with respect to both aging population and especially automation, you could potentially like see enormous improvements in the supply side. Not necessarily aging population, but especially with automation. But if that doesn't result in some sort of cash going to the individual consumer to consume those goods that are being produced, you're like dealing with a very bad economic situation. It's more disinflationary. But you're
again,
also
you're assuming that's the only. You know what? Let's put automation aside for now, because we got to get into that.
Aging population is a good example of this, because aging population, on one hand, you have increased demand for services for the elderly. Okay. You have flight of capital. So this is actually I'm plagiarizing Peter Zeihan, but basically he describes this setup where like the younger portions of the population are like the economic engine, in the sense that they're doing most of the work coming up. The middle set of the population, especially those that have a family, provide the excellent consumer market, and then the older population just before retirement are the capital like foundation for any kind of innovation and entrepreneurship to take place by the lower two cohorts. And so if you're dealing with aging population, what you have is the eldest part are going into retirement, so their assets are like flying out of the market. They're gonna go into either just straight cash or like very secure government bonds. So you start like losing that ability to improve production. The consumer base, which like is also a bigger cohort than the one below it, but a smaller one than the elder population, would be going into the elder stages, which means it's much more about saving and less more about consuming. So the consumer market begins to potentially shrink, or at least not grow at the rate that most economists expect. And then you have a smaller pool of people to actually produce those goods. And so it's like the dichotomy of like, would the increased cost of goods because of like these inflationary trends, how that would relate to otherwise a consumer market that might be shrinking because of a limited number of population. And you throw automation into the mix, it certainly improves the side of like having more goods available, but it doesn't really address the consumer side of the equation, the part about demand. But UBI creates effectively an artificial demand, except everybody can vote and actually pick products that they want. So you guarantee the consumer side, and you let automation take the supply to where it needs.
So if I understand correctly, let me just summarize this. You're saying that by ensuring that we have UBI, we make sure that everyone, including the older generations who are not working anymore, because we have an aging population, they're going to be more and more over time. We're going to make sure they still remain consumers, and then in that sense, our economy keeps growing.
Not necessarily the elders. Like you make sure that everybody can participate in a consumer economy. Whereas right now, you're much more reliant on the middle part of the pyramid that are like the biggest consumers. Okay. And that cohort is shrinking, and so as a result, like you're basically stimulating the consumer side of the economy. By enabling people to purchase more.
So that might have some impact, but I think the impact is being exaggerated a little bit, because really, how big of a difference is that going to make? If you pay a little bit of money to everyone, how much more of a consumer are you going to make of the people who are like, for example, if you're arguing that we have an aging population, right? And as a result, we need to have money coming in to everyone so that we can keep everyone.
I should emphasize the aging population was an example.
Yeah.
If I'm actually going to be intellectually consistent,
Sure.
the aging population is actually a problem against UBI because it makes it more expensive to do stuff in general.
Sure.
But nevertheless, like my point about aging population is that you're having the consumer market shrink.
Yeah.
And if you're in a shrinking consumer market, and also
does it though? Does it shrink? Why does it shrink?
Consumers.
Why is that though?
You have fewer people
for luxury items, maybe, but
so now it's actually a good point to define like what sort of things are going to be inflation and what sort of things are going to be disinflation.
We were talking about CPI inflation, right?
Yeah.
So it's an average basket that an average family needs,
exactly.
right? So what $100 can buy for you at a Walmart, basically, right? That's basically what the idea is behind it.
If you were to implement UBI tomorrow, I would concede to you that it would be inflationary, but in the long arc of history, like arc of the future,
sure.
Given the fact that one, you would expect like the populations are slowly, in much of the Western world, if you like remove immigration, the population is actually in many ways decreasing. But given that, and that means that by the very like the fact that the population base would be smaller, you're shrinking the consumer base.
Sure.
Especially given when you talk about different age categories. This is kind of stimulates the consumer base to purchase more, to at least increase the consumer demand for those goods that would otherwise be lost. And that would, I would argue, primarily go into the core products, the CPI index products, as opposed to luxury. If people are producing, like people who consume, keep in mind that like people
we're talking about essential items, right?
Yeah.
People are going to buy that regardless. Like if you're
this kind of goes back to the poverty question. Obviously, those who are extremely poor cannot afford it.
Sure. But people who are in poverty are getting welfare right now, so they're still a consumer, right?
Well, for those who are not within the income bracket for which this would enable them to purchase more of those core products, then they would not contribute to inflation on those core products. They would contribute to inflation in other sets of categories, which, we can argue that like food inflation is bad because it makes it more difficult.
Yeah.
But if there's an inflation in the cost of like, I don't know, fine arts.
Yeah. Exactly. That is what it is, I guess.
It sucks, but it is what it is.
It doesn't suck for the artist, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
All right, so
and keep in mind, like going back to the taxation idea, if you're like taxing the upper income ones, assuming there's limited capital flight and brain drain, which we can probably argue for hours about whether that would be the case or not, you're limiting their purchasing power while increasing the purchasing power of the low-income individuals. But the difference is the limits in the purchasing power of upper-income people would manifest itself in disinflationary effects in other product categories, whether it's luxuries or asset classes. Like
it would be disinflationary in other classes, you're saying?
Yeah, because you're limiting their purchasing power through higher taxes.
Oh, by putting in higher taxes, you're saying?
Yeah, I'm saying like going back to the taxation idea.
Okay, taxation.
Like, so like, yes, injecting money into the economy could be inflationary. Like if you just run a deficit of like, I don't know.
No, I got what you mean. So you're taxing the higher bracket income people.
If you do that,
so on luxury, it's
like think about the CPI when it comes down to food. If you basically like throw away food stamps and replace it with UBI, the demand.
But those are government subsidized though.
But the demand for food, like government subsidized, means that the government is paying for them.
No, they are. Yeah,
you're paying for them.
Yeah.
The demand for food is not changing that much. If assuming everybody who's in need of like food stamps is on food stamps, they're now receiving UBI. Like you're just like shuffling different programs. You're not necessarily making inflationary.
Okay.
So that's my point. Which
I think that makes sense.
Like unless like if you turn on the money printer, like the money printer goes bruh, and then like yes, that would be inflationary. But if you like basically are moving different sectors of the economy, yes, like for instance, if you like do it through taxation, you can probably expect like high-end property prices to stagnate if not decline, because you're hitting the purchasing power of those guys, while expect that I don't know, maybe a particular like essential service that the government doesn't provide, like imagine I don't know, strollers for like families might now like there might be an increase in those prices because like once you cover food and the other stuff for any low income family that has an infant. So all I'm saying is like the inflation one would be not evenly distributed.
Yeah.
So it would be much more nuanced, and two, it would not be like depending on how you implement it, it may not be as inflationary at all, if any at all.
All right, so it's a bit of a murky one, I guess. It could have effects, though.
Yeah, it depends on how you implement it. Like, for instance, the stimulus package was inflationary.
Yeah.
Because you just increased the money supply.
Yeah, because they just...
economy.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they did. But
if you don't increase the money supply in the economy, you would, broadly speaking, expect inflation to not change. It might, like, in certain product categories change.
the issue is if you increase the demand and then the supply matches it with automation, let's say, you are still speeding up the economy, right? And the more you speed up the economy, the more inflation there will be.
No, not necessarily. Like, keep in mind, if the money supply doesn't... Okay, do you agree that if the money supply doesn't expand, but productivity is expanding, so the cost of goods are becoming cheaper?
It's not just about the money supply, though. It's about how the money is being allocated and by how many people to what products, right? Because it's not just about overall inflation.
That would be like, yes, you might see inflation in certain product categories.
And that's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
so CPI inflation is when it comes to...
And my counter to that is that assuming that you, like, if you keep food stamps and also throw in UBI, and assume that food stamps doesn't fully cover, like say that if an adult,
which you may have to do, by the way.
But like say an individual, like I don't know, what are we, like 44% obesity rate. So say, like, if you give people the option to like overconsume food products, they would go for it. Then yes, if you keep food stamps and like other food related welfare programs and throwing UBI, you can expect an inflation in the food market.
Sure.
We might go to automation and then say the supply would still get there. But my point is, even going back, as long as you like shuffle these properly, you could expect a case where UBI is implemented. It's not really inflationary, but it stimulates, like, it provides certain type of economic stimulus that would be interesting. For instance, one of the biggest issues I would argue right now in housing, less so in Canada, but especially in the United States, is that you basically have certain economic hubs suck population out from the middle of the country. And the issue with that is that you're wrecking the consumer market within those middle of the country towns, while massively inflating asset prices in those economic hubs. So the cost of like the quality of living is actually going lower, arguably, in both areas, because the hubs are becoming more expensive to live in. Those are becoming like less economically viable to live in.
Exactly.
UBI would basically guarantee that whoever is left in those towns is still like generating a limited but nevertheless non-zero consumer market. Sure,
but again, it's paper over cracks. It's not really addressing the issue, right? You're just throwing some money at it.
Yes. Half the government programs are throwing money at the problem. Yeah. There's a lot of nuance.
Sure. Okay, we can...
if you want, we can move on to automation.
Yeah, we can move on from inflation. Okay. That was interesting.
Because automation is an interesting one.
Of course. This is the big stuff.
Yeah. Let's think of automation in two categories.
Sure. What are the categories?
So for context, as you know, I do a lot of stuff in that space.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of a divergent opinion, especially amongst a lot of bigger names in the AI space, much bigger than me, that whether the AI revolution and the age of automation we're seeing, especially with like core machine learning models, whether it's different than previous technological revolutions or whether it's the same.
Sure.
Let's first go assuming it's the same, which is that you have increased productivity.
Let's start right there. What do you mean it's the same? Can you define
in the sense that you're going to see massive productivity boosts across a certain number of job ranges, which in the beginning means you get to produce more of those, but at some point you saturate the consumer market for those goods. So that means that you need fewer and fewer people. Like 300 years ago, half the population was working on farms.
Yeah, and then you just
industrial revolution and like different farming techniques and automated.
Okay, so you're saying it's the same when it comes to how it affects the job market.
It moves the jobs around. Yeah. So it eliminates some jobs.
Okay,
but then it creates new ones on the other side.
So it's the same as far as how it affects the job market.
Yeah.
Is that good? Okay.
Yeah. That's the second case, and the first case, and then the second case is that AI is different. That AI. Like,
so what was your point on the first case?
So the first case, I think, the usefulness of UBI and the key point I want to get across is that if you lived 100 years ago, you could live your entire life without. Well, 100 years ago might be a bit of an example, but if you lived 200 years ago, you could live your entire life without seeing any kind of technological revolution.
Sure.
The work you were doing was beyond unlikely to be disrupted by some unique technology. And plus, if it were to be disrupted, it was very much work that would, like involve a range of motor functions, or like it would not require a lot of cognitive training, like a lot of intellectual training beforehand. It wouldn't require it. Whereas right now, just in the past, since the advent of the internet, we've had arguably every 10 years a completely altering technology coming through.
But it's not an industrial revolution.
Whether it's the cloud revolution or the mobile revolution.
Those are not industrial revolutions.
They change, for instance,
by the classical
they vastly change demands for various product categories, which in turn meant that those who were employed in those had to repurpose. My main point is the pace of innovation right now, combined with the fact that you need a lot more training to engage in those more demanding jobs that are less likely to be automated.
Sure.
Those two means that your ability to shift from an automated job to something that could provide a very nice living for you is much more limited in terms of the buffer zone you get to like be able to make that switch. And UBI would provide this type of financial buffer, albeit super small, for you to like say, I hate to use the example of self-driving trucks because having worked in this space, I actually think there are some fundamental issues that that might not be necessarily resolved. But say we achieved that.
Sure.
It's not like that 200 years ago, if you like got off the farm, you could like go and start laying bricks, and that would be the end of like one job to another.
Yeah.
Whereas right now, you can't take like a truck. It takes time to like take a truck driver and retrain him to like be a an electrician, or like you like in the extreme cases, for instance, again, this is a bad example because there are still fundamental problems in terms of the current state of models. Jeffrey Hinton famously said, I think like in 2016, that like we should stop training radiologists because we're gonna in his latest interview, he said, like, I think he said we're going to replace them in 5 years, and then 7 years later, in his latest interview, he said we're going to replace them again in 5 years. But assuming, for instance, that happens, a radiologist is like, 4 years of medical school and like years of residency and other forms of training. You can't just tell them that like, hey, here's a computer, learn how to code and become an engineer of like comparable income level, right? So considering all of these, basically, in the AI case, given the pace of the innovation, assuming that there are good jobs on the other end and jobs that are created, the skill set required and the retraining would constitute the need for a buffer state, for a buffer zone, for when the person loses a job or loses an economic opportunity to move and retrain to be employed in a different sector that's emerging.
Sure.
And that's different from previous revolutions that produce the same type of
So let's be clear on the industrial revolution. So we've had 3 industrial revolutions before, as classically defined by economists. Up until now, we were living in the Industry 3.0 age, and the consensus among a lot of the people in this space is that this is the 4th one, right? So this will be Industry 4.0.
Yeah.
So the first industrial revolution was in the late 1800s. It was with the steam engine. The second one was in the early 1900s. It was with the gas engine and electricity becoming widespread. And the third one was with transistors, microchips, which were first developed in the 70s and at a massive scale, basically, right? So, and that's
the computer level.
Yeah, that's what gave us computers, internet, smartphones, everything after that, right? So this AI revolution will be the 4th one, right? And it's very interesting. If you look through history, how people reacted to these industrial revolutions, it can teach you a lot. As you know, those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. So let's take a closer look at some of these. So there was a famous example in the 1800s. It was called the Luddite Uprising, which was basically a lot of people who were working in the wool industry. They were extremely fearful of the steam engine that was being introduced. They thought it would replace their jobs. They started causing all sorts of mayhem, destroying properties, all sorts of things. But it turns out it wasn't actually that much of a problem later on. In fact, it was kind of an overreaction. We see this time and time again in the 1930s. There's this guy, his name is John Maynard Keynes, who was discussing this. He's an economist. He was talking about how what could happen with new technologies to come and take other jobs, because this was around the time where electricity was widespread. It was changing a lot of jobs from that existed beforehand. Of course, cars were widespread at this time. They were replacing a lot of jobs that were there with, horses and all that stuff. What he was saying that this could change the way we work, but it doesn't mean that we're going to lose the ability to work, right? So it could change the way we interact with technology. It could change the way we train for work. It could change the amount of time we even spend on work. So we could have a 15-hour work week instead of a 40-hour work week, because that will be enough time to achieve the same tasks, because technology is there to help us, right? So this is something that we've seen a lot of times throughout history. And in fact, there's a famous study by Rowena Gray on the second industrial revolution in particular, and what impact it had on the job market. So the hypothesis was that such an industrial revolution causes a hollowing out in jobs that require mid-tier skills, right? So maybe radiology is a little bit at the top range of that, but truck driver would be something like that, right? So it's kind of a mid-tier skill, right? It's not no skill. It's not extremely expert. You don't need expertise to be a truck driver, right? You need to be able to drive a truck.
If you ever have radiologists watch this show, they're gonna start... I can't drop the F-bomb, but they're going to start seething on the statement that the radiologists are probably at the very top of the
They're at the top of the mid-tier skill range, I suppose.
They're pretty specialized, but yeah, go on.
They're specialized, sure, but that's why I said they're at the high range, I suppose. But
we love you, radiologists.
Of course.
Please diagnose our cancer.
Who knows? Maybe we don't end up replacing them, right? Yeah. Because it's not the mid-tier. That's not what we've seen previously. So in the second industrial revolution, particularly. This did occur. So a lot of people who had a mid-tier skill job ended up losing their jobs, but this didn't have a lasting effect. So there's another study from Lawrence Katz and Robert Margo. They said that there is no evidence that there was any long-term effects from this hollowing out that was observed in the second industrial revolution. And this could be applied here. And of course, previous performance doesn't necessarily but I think guarantee future results.
If I may,
sure.
The cases you're describing are a counterexample to the second understanding of the AI revolution, which is this is going to be the last one. This will be very different. With respect to the first one, I agree with we could agree over the idea that in the long arc of history, the hollowing effect would be mitigated. You will lose jobs in the run up to the revolution, and you would create much better ones on the other side.
Yeah.
But I don't think it necessarily addresses the problem around retraining and the pace of the development, because I think we can both agree that the general trend across each revolution is that the jobs on the other side require you to be more specialized, develop higher level skills, which require more training.
Not necessarily in that sense, because and this is something I heard from Andrew Ng is his name, right?
Yeah.
So he was talking about this. He was saying this doesn't necessarily mean we have to take people's jobs and then train them to do something completely new, right? So you were giving this example of back in the day, if you couldn't work on the farm, we would train you how to do bricklaying or something, right?
Yeah.
This doesn't necessarily apply here, because what we could do is, for example, with the radiologists, we could train them to use an AI to perform radiology. Does that make sense? So, or a lot of other cases, right?
If radiology is a highly specialized case. Okay. Now I'm gonna start geeking out about some of the specifics of AI research.
Absolutely, go for it.
There's a key argument, like for instance, in I think 2014, 2015 era, people were and this is an interesting segue for those who are super crazy about ChatGPT. But basically, in that era, there was this thought that before the end of the decade, self-driving cars would be all across the road, and the reason was we were looking at basically an exponential trend in terms of improvements across all those problems, and
which was deceiving.
It was this, but most exponentials eventually become a sigmoid, become an
S-curve.
And as it turns out, in self-driving cars, we hit the S-curve before
way too early.
Hit the line for which you could deploy these cars at scale.
Exactly.
And it could be that the AI revolution we end up seeing is that, especially in those specialized jobs, the S-curve converges well before it hits the level of completely automating the job. In which case, yes, you're now like not just a software engineer, but a software engineer using AI. It still has some downstream effects.
It's not just that though. I mean, that's one way of describing it, that it'll hit the S curve before we hit that point.
Yeah.
But even if it doesn't, let's say it completely replaces that particular job, right? What I'm trying to say is that anytime there's an industrial revolution, there is a lot of jobs created that we couldn't even conceive of beforehand, right? So back, let's say, so cars became widespread around 1910, right? Sometime around then. I don't know the exact date, but sometime around then, right? So if you lived in, let's say, 1899, you can't even imagine what a mechanic looks like,
but
right?
you're saying that, hey, like we're going through... correct me if I'm like putting false words in your mouth, but like you're saying that, oh look, like we're at the like the earliest stages of the second industrial revolution, with like the gas engine, electricity kicking in, and it's fine. Like if you're like a surgeon performing surgery, now instead of like having to perform your surgeries at night, in the daylight, you can now like use the light bulb and actually perform, like go longer or like go deeper or like it
Are you saying it didn't affect a lot of people?
No, I'm saying that like you're providing that example, and I'm saying that yes, but at the same time that cars were being invented, those who were responsible for maintaining like
horses,
there's no like path for, like they have to switch jobs. And my focus is again that like yes, some jobs will be enhanced, some jobs will be fundamentally automated. And given the fact that the trend is in general towards the direction of jobs becoming more specialized, requiring more training for you to reach the skill level, you're now dealing with a case where the change is happening faster, and the gap on average for an individual to retrain to go into a different job after the AI revolution is also becoming larger. Both of these means that you have to address two solutions. One, how do you support this individual as they're going through retraining?
I have two words for you.
How do you retrain them?
I have two words for you. Student loans. Student loans, baby.
So
go back to school, learn some new things. If it comes to that, right? And it doesn't necessarily come to that in every sense. Sure, there will be some jobs, like if you're training horses and then cars come around. Yeah, I mean, there will still be some demand for it, but not as much as it was before, obviously, right? So, yes, some of those people who are working in that industry maybe have to consider looking at maybe being a mechanic, right? But that option is there, right? So the job is there. No one is a mechanic because no one even knew what a mechanic was until 5 years ago, right? No one could even conceive of what that job is. And the same thing like
until 5 years ago?
No, like when cars first come around, right? Yeah. At that point, no one could even conceive what a mechanic was. 5 years before.
But keep in mind, like the person maintaining horses, like they have to go through a certain level of training to be able to like operate on a car.
Exactly.
Now, scale that for the 21st century, and you're looking at a much larger gap for which you need to cover and retrain that individual for a different job. Like
you're assuming that it's gonna replace a lot of jobs at the same time, which it's not necessarily going to be the case.
And it might go at different rates. The key point is UBI provides like a base of support for basic essential services, which means that you basically guarantee that individual can, like at potentially grave cost to their quality of life, but nevertheless can survive and retrain to go to a different path.
But what I'm saying is, let's say that's the case, right? Let's say a lot of people just need to go and retrain. There's no other way. There's no easier way to like do something similar to their own job. Even if that was the case, why would universal basic income be the way to provide that support? Because what we're doing, right, is, at least what you're arguing right now, is that we need to support them while they're getting retraining, and then when they get retrained, they can be in their job, they can do their thing, right? But why wouldn't we just give them student loans so that they can go learn and then just live their lives normally, right? Why would we pay them $1,000 indefinitely for those 1 or 2 years that they have to maybe retrain?
I have to disagree with the characterization that it would be just 1 or 2 years. In some cases, you might see longer retraining required.
You really think so?
Potentially, yeah.
If you want to become a mechanic, like for example, how long would it take you to learn?
It's not just how long it would take you, but it's like how long before you can like get back to a comparable level of income, which requires experience. But
it's a brand new market where there's no competition. So
Yes,
to start
but
with,
everybody is at score 0. Like imagine somebody in his 50s
yeah.
that suddenly finds themselves at the wrong side of the AI revolution.
Sure.
You can't, like, this person might have kids to support, might have like a lot of other social responsibilities, and
I mean, the welfare is there though. Like for people who just need money because there's child support from the government that's there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
UBI.
options.
I think like previously we were talking about like how it would in many ways provide a better welfare state.
Not for people who are who don't have any income, right? Also, that person has for 6 months. They have their employment insurance. There's that too. There's a bunch of stuff, right?
Yes, you could argue that like in aggregate, if you like really balance the current programs together, you might like find some solution that the person would survive without UBI. UBI is just a much simpler way to like guarantee for everybody that this happens to. They have a base of like essentials covered until they get through it to the other side.
No, but what I'm saying is, if they already have it covered, right? Why would you replace that with UBI? What are we exactly achieving?
Well, the question is, one, do we have it covered? And two, the current type of retraining people do, like in between industries, it would be like nothing compared to what you would have to do, like as you go through what people are broadly regarding as the next industry
So in this
revolution.
particular context, right, we're talking about people who have a good income job, right? And they're losing their job.
Have a reasonable.
Sure.
Yeah.
So would you say average at least?
Sure. You
Average
could
or high?
take the median household income.
So it's
Imagine.
50,000 or so. Yeah. So average or higher, right?
Yeah.
So average or higher, people who have average or higher incomes.
Not necessarily higher, around average.
I mean, radiologists have higher though, right? So average or
Radiologists
higher.
are a special case. For one, like I use the example of radiology as like one of the groups that retraining might be more difficult.
Yeah.
But I think broadly speaking, most radiologists, unless they're like in the like so far into their career, because like the human ability to like learn new things is like if you're like 85, that the ability, unless you're Warren Buffett or like somebody of that caliber, like your cognitive ability begins to decline. So, but like radiologists, broadly speaking, I would suspect anybody who can like make it through medical school and radiology residency training, they could probably get into some other specialized profession, especially if it's like, a lateral move into like a surgical specialty or some other medical field. But somebody like I think, what was this stat? Like 2.1 million people across North America work in call centers. Whisper API from OpenAI combined with probably GPT-5 would produce a good enough result with limited enough set of hallucinations and other issues that you could replace a large set of those, or at the very least like have a funnel where like you only need 10% of the call center people than before to like 90% of
a lot of it is covered by
cases
only
and then
cases,
like when you hit an edge case
but then you could also
how are you going to retrain these people? One. Two, what are they going to do? Is it like employment insurance? What if they cannot retrain in the time for employment insurance, given the pace at which it's coming? So like somebody comes out like call center and says, oh, it's okay, I'll just go like become an ad copywriter. 6 months later, they're also hit. So like basically providing an
so what I'm saying is
buffer.
So sorry to interrupt. But what I'm saying is that a lot of jobs that will be created, we can't even conceive of right now. Same way that someone who was living before the 1900s could not conceive what a mechanic is.
Then the insurance policy is to have something like UBI.
Okay, so this is the point I was making.
To cover the case in which, we
got a little sidetracked. But what I was talking about was, let's say we have an average income or slightly higher. That person, right, if they get employment insurance for 6 months, that's already higher than getting $1,000 a month for 2 years. For that one person. Right, so is that really a better substitute?
The math is a bit more complicated than that.
Of course it is, but I'm just saying it's not clear that it's a better system. At least, is that fair to say?
It's a simple system.
It is a simple system.
Addresses this. Let me give you an example.
Sure.
I guess in some sense, I come to you and I'm like, every day I like drink, I have this like scoop of greens and protein. Yeah. And you're like, if you have like this brand of fish oil and then combined with that multivitamin and then this thing and then like this much like this particular type of like spinach and like this and this and this, you in aggregate get a lot more. And I'm seeing that like the cost of managing that is like I have a simple solution that gets us the 90% of the path through. And if we see that the last 10% is actually like so problematic, you could probably enhance that program. But again, like on the topic of UBI, it more or less addresses all these issues without having to have the person file for unemployment insurance, without having to have to deal with all these sorts of cases, whether they qualify for that or
no. But the issue is
unemployment.
It's over addressing, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, it's not clear that it's actually doing better than the system that we have right now. And number two, it's over addressing. So for example, people who are not replaced, they're also getting $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
People who get a new job that is more AI friendly and will last with AI, those people will keep getting that 1,000 afterwards, even when they don't need it. So it's insufficient targeting. This is another point that I was bringing up before, is that
how is that any different from saying, oh, like when it comes down to universal healthcare, sure, cover the guy who like doesn't have a job, but why do you have to provide coverage for the one who's making 6 figures a year? They can go like buy their own insurance.
Sounds like we gotta have a debate about healthcare.
Universal.
Maybe let's hold off on that one, because I feel like that's very cancelable.
Potentially a large argument of it is like at a like a cultural level.
Yeah.
Do you just establish this as a citizen right that everybody has a right to have, and it has all these sorts of like downstream advantages?
Well, let's hold on using the term right, because that's reserved for very fundamental things, right? Like the right to have liberty, right? Or the right to, like it's not the same as no one has a right to get $1,000 for anyone, right? Can we establish that? It's not a right, right? Like maybe it's something that we want to provide to our citizens. Maybe it's beneficial for society, but it's not a right.
Do you think it is your right that in the event of an emergency, that this emergency service you're looking for actually comes for you?
It's not my human right. It's my citizen right.
Yeah, so it's a citizen right.
Yeah, but it's different than saying. So if you want to say, you believe that that's a right that citizens should have.
No, I'm saying like that's.
I know it's semantics, but I just want to make sure we get that clear. But so what's your point on insufficient targeting? Do you think that's no problem?
When it comes down to any kind of welfare program, you could go towards the extreme, which is I exactly pick how like down to the minute, down to the item, how the individual receiving this benefit is supposed to use it. Or we have the other side where we basically give the individual agency to like rely on their ability to decide for themselves.
Sure.
And any program you pick is like somewhere in between. UBI is more permissive of how you spend that money. But I don't like, my point is on that front that any program you set up, you have to give some level of freedom to the person receiving it.
Sure.
If you're considering it a citizen right, then
I don't want to cut you off, but the better terminology actually would be it's my privilege as a citizen, because it's not my right to have someone else's labor to help my medical situation, right?
Yeah.
It's a privilege that we all have as citizens, and it's a privilege that we want to retain for all citizens, right? Because that's a value that's important for us, but it's not a human right.
Well, let me give you an example. If you go to some hospital, like say, I guess our age range might be too early, but like 20 years from now.
Sure.
And say you're diagnosed with like very early stage cancer.
Sure.
From the standpoint of the society, especially one that is funding your healthcare.
Yeah.
You must the targeted outcome is for you to take the treatment necessary and come back to the society. But you have the right to refuse.
Exactly.
In a similar sense, here it's like if you're a recipient of UBI, most people would take the treatment. Most people would spend it on essential goods when necessary. But would you grant somebody the right to potentially deviate from the optimal way to spend that money, under the account that as a citizen they get some level of agency? And I think
it's a different case though, because in one case, right? So in the healthcare case, when you refuse treatment, you're refusing to get what we're offering you as the privilege. In the case of UBI, if you're refusing the money, that will be the same, right? But refusing to use it on something that's good for you is not the same, right? It's a very different example.
Well, consider for instance unemployment.
Yeah.
Many of the unemployment benefits, you could argue that by in fact making it harsher, you could push somebody to like
pursue a job more, or like is the unemployment benefit like you could probably argue that if somebody doesn't have any type of unemployment benefit, like the scare of having nothing to eat might be a stronger motivating factor than like.
And that's another point we have to actually talk about, the incentive, but we'll get into that. We'll get into the incentive.
Like I'm saying that like you could go to an area where you're like, this is the target behavior I want.
Sure.
But in any of these programs, at some level, you should give the individual some agency, and I don't see a problem in UBI giving the individual agency to spend that money however they want, and go on the assumption that they will spend that money on average wisely and to their own benefit.
But it's not just that though, because you're talking about replacing some of the other welfare systems that we already have in
I said
place.
that was one option. The other option was raising taxes, but
no. But if you're not replacing them, then you are causing inflation.
Yeah. So assume that like there's
something's got to give here. Yeah, something's got to give. So which poison are you picking here? I have to lock you into an answer here.
Not replacing like going through the taxes way.
Yeah.
On average, like you're still not expanding the money supply, so the inflation effect would be local to a certain number of goods. But yes, let's assume that you're replacing like welfare system for the sake of argument.
Okay. So when you replace that, right, then now you're going from a situation where you have, you're giving people agency, but in specific cases, you're doing something that would achieve more benefits for them. And you're switching over to a system where it doesn't necessarily do that. It, in fact, causes a lot more people make a lot more bad decisions, right? Because previously you had people, at least they have their food covered, right? They have the food stamps. Even if they are terrible with money, at least they have their food stamps. They're not going to go hungry.
Yeah.
But if you don't give them food stamps, just give them $1,000 a month, that causes a lot of problems. You see my point here?
Yeah. Like a certain portion of the population might decide to go like gamble that money away.
And then what happens when they don't have money to eat?
What happens if they lose their food stamps?
That's not the same thing.
You
can't use your food stamp to gamble.
You can sell it to others.
Sure.
Surely there's a black market for it.
I don't know if there's a big enough black market for it. Maybe something small.
I'm saying if you intend to like.
Surely it's
use
easier
those
to
irresponsibly. Yes.
It's easier to use the cash more irresponsibly, though. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's also easier for the government to capture all of your income and then tell you how you should spend it more responsibly.
No, of course we're not talking about
nothing responsible about spend like for any of the people in our friends group to spend X amount of dollars on like alcohol for a particular festivity and drink it. Surely, if you put that in, I don't know, like your the TFSA, you would get a better return on investment.
No, but it's different. If you're not asking for other people's money. You're not asking to tax people more and then give that person, redistribute that money to everyone else, right? Because that's not the purpose of why we're doing it. The reason why we tax people and we put in welfare systems is to help those in need get the help that they need, right? What we don't want is to encourage bad behavior. What we don't want is to facilitate bad behavior. We don't want to be an empowering element, right? We don't want to take money from others and then redistribute it just to empower people to make more bad decisions. My point is,
as society, we're already like we're not playing the welfare game this optimally to have to worry specifically about a certain portion of the population. Like the stimulus checks, a certain portion of them ended up in Dogecoin. That was not the government's intention. But in aggregate, overall, when it came down to covering essential goods and services...
Yeah, I mean, no one says the stimulus package was perfect.
No, but all of the criticism I've heard about it was mostly around inflation and how on earth are we going to pay the debt that the government just added to the balance sheet.
And also, I think the rules could have been set up much better, the way they were set up.
Probably, yes. Yeah. I wonder if we should, like, at some point within the next few minutes, actually, like, go into a neutral phase and start discussing potentially, like, sides of each other's argument that weren't mentioned during the call.
We could do that, sure, yeah. We can try it out.
Like 25 minutes, give or take.
All right, sure. But let's just finish on this.
I wanna do two things before we like leave this one, which was, like, you mentioned work incentive, and then the second part of automation, which is this time could be different, and I have some good arguments for why it might be different. But yeah, like in theory, if I drink myself to oblivion every week, back in college, you could call it an average payment a year day. No, mom and dad, I did not. I was a responsible student. Like, there's an argument that if you are in a universal healthcare system, this individual is using someone else's tax dollars to receive a healthcare service.
But again, that's fine.
That's providing them with the ability to continue to engage in this destructive behavior. Whereas if they
not directly, right? By just perpetuating their life, we're not empowering them to make bad decisions.
You're prolonging the period over which they can continue to make these bad decisions.
By just keeping them alive, you're saying we're responsible for their bad decisions?
You can make the same argument about any kind of unemployment benefit, which is that by providing somebody access to basic needs, you're actually prolonging the period over which they can go without going after a job.
No, I already agreed that it could be done much better, but you're talking about replacing this, and if you want to replace the way it's done right now, you need to replace it with a method that is more effective in those manners. So otherwise, why even replace it, right? Just because it's easier to administrate, that's not a good enough reason to go ahead and replace this. Especially when you have all these other issues that come up with it, right? With insufficient
also
targeting,
other benefits.
Yeah, sure. But what I'm trying to say is, are those benefits really considerable enough over what we have already? That's what we're trying to figure out.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if the there's a
loading screen.
It's a more nuanced conversation because like it depends on who you're looking at. If you're looking at the benefit for somebody who's not like who's not necessarily super engaged and like doesn't, it's like, oh, I should go like get my food stamps at this point. Oh, I should make sure that I like talk to the representatives to make sure that like I provide them with enough documents that I'm in need of this thing. And then, oh, I should also like refile my unemployment thing.
Sure.
Like if you compare that individual versus like, I as a citizen privilege, I always get $1,000 coming into my bank account. So if I lose my job, I have like a bit of a grace period with my savings, or even just on the basis of this money to like feed myself, or like like a family of I don't know, like the wife and the husband, or like the husband and the husband, or any other combination can like still like
careful
continue to live. It's still like a system that yes, it enables you to potentially like abuse it as an individual more, but in aggregate it will deliver more or less the same set of benefits, if not better, without all the hassle of all the other stuff we talked about around stigma, around managing, around administration, around requirements. Like imagine like having to be in a position of like, oh, should I like try and like take this job that I might get like laid off from in a month from now, or should I keep my food stamps and unemployment benefits? Like not having to think about those are all those advantages in this type of scenario.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, you're saying that the fact that you don't have to consider whether you should take the job or not is the benefit, right? Over what we have already. Because right now you have to kind of
remove a lot of complexity from the system while pretty much maintaining 90% of the benefits.
Because like right now you might think, okay, I could get a new job right now, but I could just wait 3 more months for my employment insurance and then get the new job, right? So stuff like that doesn't happen.
Exactly. Like which gives a good transition to the incentive part. Yeah. It's like, is the incentive of having UBI any like and not worrying about getting a job any worse than the incentive of staying on unemployment benefits when one is tied to you not having a job and the other one will just stack on top?
Well, the difference is that universal basic income is going to be there indefinitely, whereas employment insurance is limited, right? So for 6 months or whatever in other countries they have there, for that amount of period you're covered. But after that whole time you gotta be looking for a job, right? So you have an incentive to be looking for a job because this is going to end. This is not going to last forever. Right, so that's the difference.
Well, why 6 months? Why not 3 or 12?
We can have that discussion, but the point I'm making is that it has to be definite, not indefinite. Right? I'm not saying necessarily it has to be 6 months, but having a deadline gives you some sort of an incentive to look for jobs and try to find something else to do, right? Whereas if you keep getting the same money over and over again indefinitely, you have less of an incentive to go out there, or at least you don't have your feet on the fire, right? You don't have a deadline to work to.
You don't have a deadline in the same sense that, look, if you tell me that, like, how do I put it? Like, imagine you want to go for a run.
Yeah.
If you tell me there's a grizzly bear behind me, you're going to get much greater incentive out of me to
become an athlete in no time.
Run faster. But the solution to like getting people to run faster is not like putting a grizzly bear behind them. It's not
Sure.
like necessarily.
I mean, it could be a good solution, though. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, but like putting a threat of losing access to the essential things you need to survive.
Sure.
Is not. I don't think it's. There are some like.
But
ethical
that's
issues
not what
on
it
the,
is, though. It's like so for a couple of months you're getting something that's comparable to what you were getting before.
Yeah.
But then after that, you're still not being left to die,
What if 6
right?
months is not sufficient?
Sure, but then in those cases, you're still not being left to just starve. You still have all the other government programs.
All the other programs are indefinite. It's only
They are,
unemployment insurance
they are, but there's a little bit of a difference, right?
Yeah.
So with universal basic income, it's the same regardless. So it's a static line. Whereas with employment insurance, right, for 6 months, first of all, you're covered better for those 6 months. So if you do actually repurpose your time and you find a better job, you're making a lot more from employment insurance in the meantime. And also, the other thing is that there are different stages to it, right? So if you have something comparable to what you were earning before, right, or even something much more than what the government benefits offer for other people, that kind of gives you a little bit more of an incentive because you know that cliff is coming, right? So you're still maintaining your way of living for another couple of months, but you know that it's going to crash at some point, right?
I think we'll have to look up the data on that. I'm not too convinced that cliff is like
As big of
not
an incentive?
having that cliff.
Yeah.
Assuming that there are not those like adverse incentives in terms of like, oh, I make more money on this type of unemployment.
Yeah.
Like assuming those are not the case, I'm not sure the cliff is as strong of an incentive for somebody to like find a job. Because keep in mind, like whether it's UBI or unemployment insurance, we're talking about like a massive reduction in the person's income. You're like basically covering the basic.
But
needs,
employment insurance is much more than
unless like the person is like minimum wage employee.
Yeah.
My main point is like I'm not terribly certain that given that you don't lose the benefit that you're receiving, that has that severe of an impact on someone's incentive, on the general population's incentive to go look for jobs that would still like produce greater income for them.
Sure.
Especially given that they can stack it with UBI as opposed to replace unemployment insurance with the new income. Like I don't think that's necessarily a given. The main reason I don't think is that a lot of the other stuff that in society we've presumed to act as deterrents and good incentive, like for instance, it's a bit of a segue, but like the death penalty, like the studies are like relatively torn as to whether this really provides the incentive built, or like time and time again you see like a government subsidy for a particular project, and then you think that just because the incentives are there, you would get a particular behavior, but you don't really see it. So I'm not too sure
but the incentive is there though, right? So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about incentives.
How much it manifests itself.
So you want to talk about the influence that the incentive has? Is that your issue with the
my point is like to me, just based on the stuff I've read, the biggest problem with welfare states and how they potentially hinder the individual's incentive to like get off of welfare and move on to like some productive or like some other stage is primarily driven into the fact that a lot of those welfare states require you to be in a particular situation, and so you're always faced with the option of lose my current state, take risk and try to get to a level, and there's no guarantee that all like
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. So you're saying
UBI is uniform.
I see what you're saying. So you're saying that because of welfare, because it ends when you get a job, it could cause more of a lack of an incentive for you to get a job than having
UBI.
Okay, sure, that's fair, I suppose. But there are other ways where it could cause problems for incentives, though. So, for example, if you
I'm listening.
Sure, go ahead. So, for example, if you're receiving universal basic income, right, and the other thing to keep in mind is that every single person will receive it. So if you're in a household of, let's say, 4, you have a wife, and I don't know, do children get it in your model?
Most systems would
every single person
at the adult age.
When you get it all, okay. Both of you getting it, you could just live without ever working, especially if you live with your
which is, I would argue, a feature, not a bug, because it means that if both heads of the family lose their jobs, they don't starve. And
it is a feature in that sense, but we got to also talk about the mental health aspect of it, right?
The thing again that I have a tough time understanding is that there's a given here that if you give people the very basic essentials of living, that they don't care about working. I'm
not saying there's a given. I'm just saying there is a portion of the population who is like that. Is that fair? A considerable portion.
I would argue a very small portion. But yes, some people might be like that.
Yeah.
But the key point is the vast majority, especially those like highly productive members of society, I don't think they care whether the impact of UBI has. I'll try to get closer. I don't think they care whether the impact of like whether they have their essential services covered. They're still going to strive to like get to the next level, get bigger, and usually they're also responsible for much of the economic output.
I think you're projecting your own ambition onto other people.
No. I mean, what was it, like the Purdue's principle or whatever it was? It was like basically 80% of the economic output is driven by the top 20% of the participants in the economy.
Sure. But that means that the other 80% are.
Sometimes it's even worse. It's like the square root of the population is responsible.
Yeah,
for
the 2080 rule. Yeah.
Like the member of society that gets UBI, which again is universal basic income. Like this is not balling. This is like you won't die from starvation. You won't die because of like a lack of access to antibiotics. Like you'll barely survive. The individual who like takes that is like, oh yes, I would rather have that than like work a little and supplement that income, not replace it.
Sure.
For one, under the colonial welfare system, you're likely going to have to spend more money on that individual versus like emergency services and so on. And for two, I don't necessarily think that not having that individual participate in the economy is as big of an economic hit than all the other advantages that UBA provides. That we've discussed.
Okay, so just before we move on to the next thing, do you want to address anything as far as insufficient targeting? Because you didn't really talk about that.
No, I told you that like insufficient targeting comes with the territory. That like
so you think it's fine? It's not a big issue.
It's something that like unless you go into a totalitarian state where you like, it's kind of like about where you basically put the agency on the individual to be able to make
not just for that. Like for example, why are you paying millionaires $1,000 a month to do what?
That's more like a feature of like just making the system super simplified, because those millionaires are paying a lot more back in taxes.
Okay.
Yeah,
I suppose.
Like if I give you 20 and you give me back 50, it doesn't matter. There's like a third.
I'd feel like I'm getting scammed. I'm not gonna lie.
But like there's a third, and then as a consequence of that UBI, you're also like enjoying much greater levels of safety and.
Okay, so I suppose because you're baking it into the tax system, it's not.
Yeah, it goes back to like the universal healthcare thing, which is like, you know, why would the rich guy who can't easily pay out of pocket for every operation have to like still chip in for the universal healthcare insurance? It's part of the system. It makes it simplify. It makes the system operate as a whole.
Yeah, instead we should send him $1,000 a month and then take 500,000 more from his taxes.
I mean, it's like progressive taxation. This one's a social program.
I suppose. Okay.
I want to. Is there anything?
No, it's okay. We can move on. Yeah.
The automation one. It is not particularly clear, and I'll try to keep this to 3 minutes so we can like do a wrap up.
Sure.
But it's not particularly clear that this time would be the same. I hope it would be the same. But the key issue is that previous industrial revolutions, the first two primarily focused on physical work. And
so you're talking about as far as the hollowing out of the job?
Yeah. And so right now we live in a society where physical work on behalf of an individual is pretty much replaced by automation.
Sure.
There are areas where you have like to work with your hands, like whether you're a plumber or a surgeon or an electrician, and that's because our state of automation, like this is actually like replicating the human hand, is actually much more like a dexterity and intelligence problem than it is like a power and effort problem.
Sure.
But no one's like hiring the two of us to like move a ton of stuff around. And the key difference here is that arguably the computing revolution somewhat did this by enabling you to like generate a large set of computations, and basically any computation, any mathematical problem that involved arithmetic could now be optimized.
Exactly.
And the cost of it was lower. This actually was enhanced productivity for knowledge work and the stuff that required intellect. Here, we're now dealing with the cost of intelligence insofar as it is about information processing and predicting concepts based on previous patterns.
Yeah.
That cost is going lower.
Yeah.
I'm not terribly convinced that if this sigmoid, if the S curve we're looking actually surpasses the majority of humans on this curve, putting aside all the like the existential and misinformation, all the other issues that something like that would cause.
Post-truth era.
I'm not terribly convinced that on the other side of it, we might actually have enough jobs. There might be jobs involving like entertainment and human leisure and so on. But we might actually like if this S curve surpasses average human intelligence, then you're dealing with a situation where like a large sector of the population might not even be trainable for the type of knowledge.
There are always things that AI can't do. One was entertainment, you mentioned. So, for example, humans want to watch humans play soccer. They don't want to watch robots play soccer. That's one. I mean,
you could like put the soccer ball on a like a precision guided missile and like go through the goalie. But
no one wants to watch that.
Exactly. Like entertainment, especially those that are inherently human. Yes, those would be safe.
Entertainment will be safe, and there could be a lot of new forms of entertainment. Think of that. So we're limited to thinking of entertainment the way it is right now, right? Think of it this way: before the 1900s, no one knew what TV was, right? So that's a new era that was supplemented by electricity being widespread, right? Because of the Industrial Revolution, that's something that could happen. That led to a lot of people becoming actors for TV or stuff like that, right? So there will always be stuff that we can't even conceive of. And it's not just for entertainment either. Creativity is another one. So this is something that someone proposed.
Creativity is a bit difficult.
It is murky.
Our own logo was generated by a diffusion model at some level.
That is true. That is true. But I just want to point this out, that just because AI is able to imitate an art style doesn't mean that it can come up with an art style of its own. So, for example, you can get AI to imitate Van Gogh, but you can't get AI to be Van Gogh.
What I suspect is a wonderful episode on is AI a net good or a net negative. It's difficult. Yes.
At least it's not clear whether that's
current systems have an issue in terms of generalizing outside of the distribution of the data they have already seen.
Yeah.
Arguably, the way ChatGPT solved it was that instead of trying to solve the out of distribution learning problem, they just trained it on the entirety of the internet, made human knowledge the distribution. So yes, like there's still a very big unknown to what extent these large language models will be able to do independent, for instance, research in a range of scientific topics. But nevertheless, even assume that yes, we have some jobs left, but for the vast majority of the population, they either have to become entertainers. Now, becoming an entertainer is not easy.
Or an influencer.
To become
of course. We'll see how it goes. Leave us a like down below if you enjoyed this video.
But nevertheless, that means that, again, we go back to the problem of you have automation in all other sectors.
Yeah.
So you have to somehow give people the ability to participate in purchasing various forms of entertainment. And unless they're also entertainers themselves, in which case we have a purely entertainment economy, which I wouldn't know exactly how that works because there's only so many hours in a day.
Sure.
Unless we somehow build a model for that, to me it's the solution in that environment is universal basic income, and then a number of subsectors, including entertainment, including competitive sports, including purely human endeavors, that then yes, you get to participate, and if you're better at it, you get to consume more of that universal basic income from others coming to you, so you have greater purchasing power in terms of your own entertainment. But it's
there's one dissonance there though. So you're saying that AI is probably you're using two things to help your argument, which aren't necessarily compatible. So one is that you're saying AI is going to potentially replace a lot of jobs. We may not be able to replace a lot of those because, other than entertainment or stuff like that. And the solution will be basic income. So that's one argument you have. The other one was that we're going to tax everyone a little bit more. And that's going to be where we get the money for it. But if there are going to be less people working...
If you have automation at a level that it has significantly replaced jobs to the extent that there are good chunks of the population at that point, that you can't train anymore...
Taxing more isn't going to supply the money.
In that case, the only form of taxation is about taxing the fundamental
the
groups and companies that control these models.
What if they go offshore? More importing taxes?
Now we're getting into an area, but I suspect that if you reach that level and a lot of the other issues that could happen with that level of intelligent AI hasn't occurred, then there's a very strong case in terms of turning access to those types of models the same way we deal with utilities, which that they effectively become citizen rights. The company loses the same type of power in terms of moving around, but they also, in many ways, become monopolies in this space. But if you get to that level, then like you have to.
Yeah, that's a very, very. It's hard to imagine what would happen there.
Like you have to come up with a new economic model, and again, UBI is like a simple one. You just
maybe we'll get ChatGPT to design us a new model.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe the AI like.
Or maybe they'll just replace all of us and just Terminator style. You know.
Yeah, or maybe we just like get to like a certain level of like I don't know, like an over automated socialist utopia where like the money just vanishes.
I don't know, man. Anytime anyone uses the word utopia, it usually doesn't end well, but we'll see how it goes. All right, so that's about it. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
So I think we should start by wrapping up that like good discussion, and I'll let you do the outro, but before we go there, stuff too important to recognize is that like we're both in this discussion trying to like defend one side, but we're also gaining a better understanding of the other side.
Absolutely.
I think before the discussion, I told you that like after researching this, I've actually become like much more moderate than the previous position I had.
Exactly.
Some of the stuff we didn't mention, like I think one of the biggest, as the guy arguing pro, and it's probably personally on the pro side.
Don't give that away. No more. All right, this is the only time. The first episode.
That was
from this point onwards, we're not gonna tell.
Yeah, but like one of the biggest things, I think, biggest downsides of UBI that we didn't mention that would probably like need the entire thing. You're really pissed that I mentioned.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Go on.
Is about fraudulent activity. We clearly, both like COVID estimates across Canada, but especially across the United States, prove that we don't necessarily have the level of institutions necessary to be able to distribute this level of money without a good component of it going to fraud. And so any kind of system would have to start small, have localized and distributed levels of governance to be able to like make sure. And I would suspect that in doing so, citizens might have to forgo some of their privacies, like privacy freedoms right now that they have. For instance, they might have to specifically associate a particular bank account with themselves or some transactions and so on. It's estimated that up to 20% of the COVID stimulus checks that were written could have gone to fraud. So absent institutions that protect against that, you can create a market for fraudulent activity very quickly. One that is dealing with hard cash, which is much more attractive than, say, food stamps or arguably a similar market occurs with unemployment, but that's besides the point. But outside of that, good discussion. I suspect like there are a few future episodes coming up on some of this stuff. We just
100%. We did some previews in there. But yeah, that was about it. What do you guys think? That was our thoughts, not our views necessarily, not what we think, but what we had to defend and the points that we could bring up for the position that we had to defend. Let us know in the comments down below. If you haven't done so already, make sure to smash the subscribe button down below and join the community. It's going to be a fun podcast. We're going to do a lot of different topics here. We're gonna try go a little bit more controversial, maybe sometimes go into some cancelable territory, but remember, it's on our own opinion, so it's just free discussion. But yeah, it could be a lot of fun stuff. So if you want to check that stuff out, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, or if you're listening to the audio only format, then leave us a 5-star review there while you're at it. Why not? I'm Shervin House. This is Payman.
Yes, and before we go off, you could also potentially comment some of the topics you would like to us to cover in the near term future.
I'm scared what they're gonna comment.
Don't turn our podcast into like cancellation speedrun podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Please,
we would love to maintain our other careers.
Please nothing too hot. Let's start a little bit more moderate. But yeah, if you have any thoughts, if you have any recommendations, let us know. And that's about it for this episode. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one.
Next time.
Cheers.